Well, I thought I'd make a little video whilst I'm up here at Andrews Point and Turtle Lookout. Make a video about threshold, which is something in a spiritual sense everybody comes across. A threshold in faith, a threshold in physical endurance, perhaps, all these sorts of things. But it's a real kind of a thing, albeit part of the illusion or part of the dreaming itself, but it's an idea of limitation. And having just done our Sunday morning Zoom session, I thought I'd go and have a little walk before it gets too hot, and come up to Andrews Point, where I like to go and sit quietly and sometimes meditate. But today it seems that the sun has decided to test my threshold and my ideas rather about the sun and the heat. And I tell you, I don't have a thermometer, but it would be probably 35 Celsius and the humidity probably in the 90s, 90%. So threshold is something that you'll come across within the framework of the ideas of healing, where it seems like, as we were talking about in the Zoom meeting this morning, when I was pursuing the healing of an idea in my mind of cancer, there was a threshold in me where I just couldn't take it anymore. And I realized that there was either going to be some kind of miracle for me, or I was just going to let the cancer do its work and be done with my physical journey. But I'd chosen for faith. And I don't remember whether I knew it or not, but the journey of faith brought me up against my threshold with that idea, with the threshold of my ideas about faith. I always say that faith is its own reward, and as you begin to take little experiments or make bold experiments in faith, you are rewarded. And the reward is the recognition that you are somehow supported by a higher power. Call that God, universal flow, higher mind, whatever you want, it doesn't really matter, creative source, but something beyond your own understanding. And that was certainly the case with that episode, that story where I was healed of cancer by faith. And if you contact Tina in my friends list, Tina Tyler, she can send you the clip of that. I won't go into it now, it's a bit of a long story. But the idea of a threshold is a real one, and I have another story shorter to tell. When I was sitting with my apprentice in my tattoo studio, and we were having lunch, and she was talking about this long distance running event that she was doing, or what that she had done or something. And it suddenly occurred to me how unfit I was in the physical nature of my experience of myself, how unfit I was. And I said something to her like, I wish I could run a marathon or do a something, like that and be fit. I'd never really had a reference in my mind of being fit other than when I was a young child. And of course, children never run out of energy until they do, and then boom. So, and she said to me, well, if you're serious about that idea, we were sitting at lunch eating the most greasy, horrible, unhealthy food, I guess, some sort of burger thing with chips. And she said to me something along the lines of, if you're serious about that idea of getting fit, why don't you train with me? We'll do some jogging and build up, and we'll enter into this run. We looked up something that was coming up, I think it was 6 months or a year away, in Townsville, And it was a 10-kilometre, something to do with McDonald's. Not that you could really equate McDonald's with fitness, but I think in the attempt to push the idea that their food's not complete rubbish, they present a false face like anything else does in this world. But so I agreed, and during the course of that training there were thresholds. There was the initial threshold where I couldn't run 100 metres and I had to stop and walk for 100 metres and then run again, and eventually I could run or jog, slow running, jog for a kilometre, and then it became 2 and then it became 5. But in each increase, in each increase of the length of distance that I wanted to stretch out to, there was this threshold. I had to push the old threshold, the old idea of limitation that I can only run so far, and I had to push through it. Now, that's the same with spiritual discipline, with meditation especially. In the practice of meditation, and it is a practice, you don't just sit down and jag it straight away in general, unless you're one of those very advanced old soul kind of people, but for most of us it's a practicing, a daily practice, or perhaps a practice when we feel called to practice. We get a feeling of it that we need to do it, and that's more the case where it will be efficient, because you don't really want to turn it into a religious observance where you do it every day like a ritual, because the whole purpose of meditation and spiritual discipline is to get your mind out of its ritualistic, repetitive circles of nothingness, including those that you develop as a spiritual aid. Eventually everything has to go, everything has to fall away, and you find yourself in the presence of a silent space in your own mind, in an observance of that silence, and a reaching out and feeling out and listening into the silence, with no objective association to it other than a state of being. And it's kind of hard to talk about that. You have to experience it. You have to meditate and find yourself in that place. So there are thresholds as you go through meditation, and one of those initial thresholds will be the talky mind, where you'll find that your mind just won't be silent. And of course you'll need to apply the lessons of your mind training if you're using A Course in Miracles. All of those early lessons, the first half of the workbook, is designed to undo the way you see things now, and you may find that you develop a relationship with a specific set of those lessons, a few of them perhaps, that will help you in that talky mind bit, where you can, through a mantra style repetitive action of thought, as is given in the second half of the workbook, find yourself in a greater and greater stillness of mind, able to focus on one particular thought for an extended period of time, until, of course, when you get to the end of the workbook and you are offered the thought God is, and then we cease to speak, where you enter from that God is utteration into a state of silent beingness, in a condition of listening, if you like, or willingness to receive, or openness. But again, all these stages are thresholds. Now, in the first stages where your mind's talky, it does that to maintain an old thought system. It does that to keep you constantly distracted from silence and from stillness. And as you realize that, and as you accept the past purpose that you had given your mind, which was an attempt to prove through belief, albeit false, that you are separate from God, you can see all of that talky business as nothing more than a distraction from the realization that being separate from God, which is everything, is actually impossible. It's actually impossible. And so then you go through the process of the purification of all of that thinking, which is going to take a miracle at some point. And it'll bring you up against a threshold. You'll find there are people and situations and things that have been traumatic perhaps in your past, and you have to forgive these things within yourself as the author of your old script, and forgive yourself for asking those ones to play that part for you. And some of those parts can be tragic and horrific. And there's a threshold with that, where you'll realise that within yourself, when I even tell you about the idea of forgiveness, you'll say, well, I can never forgive so-and-so for what they did to me. That's going to bring you up against a threshold where that determination that you can never forgive them and the actual action of forgiveness come point to point, head to head, and you have to make a decision. And quite often it'll be a fuck it decision. Fuck it. I've got no choice. What am I going to do? Sit here at this impasse forever? You really want to cut off your nose to spite your face? And there'll probably perhaps be many. My teacher Ted used to refer to them as ring pass knots, seeming points of impassability that require some kind of divine intercession to be able to reinterpret the defences that you're using to maintain the defence, to actually begin to flip that defensive nature over and use it for your salvation or for your enlightenment, so that it becomes useful. And one of those, of course, is realising that that person's been playing a part for you to bring you to this moment here and now. A dream of death wouldn't be very convincing if you didn't have anyone representing the hallmarks of what death is, or the echoes of death in your own mind. Suffering, pain, sickness, all of those sorts of things. And then you'll kind of realise, you'll have these threshold moments, and you'll push through them with determination and perseverance. You'll push through them and have a kind of a clarity regarding the action of mind that is occurring in you, which we're going to call healing or letting go, which is actually bringing you moments of synchronicity, perhaps deja vu, divine recognition, and maybe even revelation, maybe even something incredibly profound and beyond the body. But you will recognize something because it will be different. There'll be a kind of like, how did that happen moment? Having had several of those how the hell did that happen moment in my own transformation, I can only ever come up with the solution or the answer that it was miraculous. But that's the whole purpose. We're learning to become miracle-minded and push through those threshold moments. And then, of course, when you get into a place where you feel like you've made some progress, the tendency will want to be to tell yourself it's all good now. I've gotten out of the frame of mind that put me in the place where I sought spiritual relief in the first place. If you're a drug addict or alcoholic, that will be the recovery from that addiction. However, the mindset that valued that addiction in the first place is still yet to be healed. In its totality, the addiction itself was simply an effect of the original belief in the necessity for an addiction or some sort of behaviour to confirm the separated mind's position. You'll use an addiction, or you'll use a relationship, or you'll use anything. The mind will use anything it can, and it'll smash reality every way it can to have an experience on its own terms. And so all of these things are thresholds, and then you go into the next one. So there's an awareness of some very steep steps here, but there's an awareness. Don't get comfortable, all right? Once you find a clear space and a clear moment, and you seem to have a certain amount of inner peace, and things seem to be like you're getting a grasp on it, don't get comfortable, okay? Resist the temptation to fall back to sleep. Keep going, and by this time you must have developed some kind of ideas about communing with the spirit, taking leaps of faith and asking through prayer, continue to ask, what's next? How can I be of service? How can I be helpful? And you'll be led into things, situations and events that represent what is still potential in you. Okay, which we can look at just roughly as the idea of the future, having already been through the cleaning up of the grievances and the judgments of our past. So, better go this way, I think. And there will be thresholds in this. You'll see hopes and dreams and ambitions and all sorts of things. And it's not that you don't engage in those things, but you engage in them without attachment to any kind of outcome, and you engage in them if it's given you to do so. If the directive is from within you to do that, you feel it in your heart, you're inner directed somehow, and you're not doing it because you feel forced or out of any sense of being desperate for some sort of change. Everything just becomes easy and flows, like walking downhill, like I'm doing now. Little cave there, you can see the light at the back of the cave. But to get out of the tunnel of that cave, you have to go through it and push through whatever obstacles in the cave to get to the light. I don't know if you can see it in there. That's kind of a nice little analogy, but anyway. So, and then you find yourself in that still place. Eventually find yourself in that still place where you realise you have no attachments to outcomes or no concern about the future or the past, and you find yourself in a more abiding presence of being here and now, where you're simply able to go with the flow with whatever's presented, and you find an ease and a simplicity and a joy in that. And that will also transfer to your meditation, where you're simply able to sit in the silence for extended periods. Don't try to force it, just be honest where you find yourself, sitting in extended periods of silence, listening for the voice for God directly. And you will hear it. All right, well, that's about it. Peace be with you, and I hope that's helpful. Push your thresholds. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to fear. This is a journey into fear, but with the Holy Spirit with you, there's actually nothing to fear. It's just rubber skeletons and ghosts, like a cloth over a balloon in a sideshow ride. All right, peace.